The hospital room was unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. White walls, white sheets, white silence. The only splashes of color came from the monitors displaying Julian Blackwell's vital signs. Steady and unchanging for the past 3 weeks. Ellie Morgan adjusted her scrubs and checked her watch. 8:24 p.m. Almost time for her shift to end, but she wanted to do one final check on her patient. She hadn't expected to be assigned to the richest man in the city, heir to the Blackwell real estate empire. The private wing of the hospital felt like another world compared to the chaotic emergency room where she normally worked. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell," she said softly, checking his IV. "It's just Ellie again." Julian Blackwell remained motionless, his handsome face relaxed in what appeared to be peaceful sleep. The doctors called it a non-responsive state following the car accident that had sent his silver Bentley off the edge of a mountain road. 3 weeks, and not a single sign of consciousness. "Your numbers look good today," Ellie continued, making notes on her tablet. She had gotten into the habit of talking to him, even though the neurologist had told her there was very little chance he could hear anything. Behind her, the door clicked open. Ellie turned to see Victoria Blackwell, Julian's stepmother, enter the room. Her heels made sharp little sounds against the floor, like weapons. "Nurse," Victoria acknowledged with a cool nod. "Any changes?" "No, Mrs. Blackwell. His condition remains stable." Victoria's perfectly made-up face betrayed nothing as she looked down at her stepson. "Such a shame. The board meeting is tomorrow. They can't keep waiting forever." Ellie adjusted Julian's blanket unnecessarily. Something about Victoria always made her feel like she needed to look busy. "The doctor will be by in the morning," Ellie offered. "Perhaps there will be some improvement by then." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. We're all hoping for a miracle." Footsteps in the hallway announced another visitor. Victoria's face transformed into a mask of sorrowful concern so quickly that Ellie almost missed the transition. Andrew Blackwell, Julian's cousin and Victoria's nephew, entered carrying a leather briefcase. His tailored suit seemed at odds with the worry lines around his eyes. "Aunt Victoria," he greeted, then nodded at Ellie. "How is he today?" Before Ellie could answer, Victoria placed a hand on Andrew's arm. "We should speak outside." They left the room, but the door didn't close completely. Ellie moved to shut it, catching fragments of their hushed conversation. "The lawyers are getting restless," Andrew was saying. "Keep them in line," Victoria replied. "Another week, maybe 2, and we file the papers to transfer executive control. And if he wakes up?" "The doctors assure me that's unlikely." Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced back at Julian, still motionless, still trapped in whatever darkness held him. For the first time, she wondered if that darkness was a prison rather than a refuge. Over the next few days, Ellie found herself watching Victoria and Andrew more closely. She noticed how they spoke to the doctors in the hallway instead of at Julian's bedside, how they scheduled their visits when the neurologist wasn't around, how Victoria had requested a reduction in Ewan's family visitation hours to allow him to rest. One evening, nearly a month after the accident, Ellie was working a double shift. The night had stretched into that hollow hour when even hospitals seem to hold their breath. She was alone with Julian, checking his vitals, when she noticed something. His breathing pattern had changed slightly, just enough to make her pause. "Mr. Blackwell?" she whispered. "Julian, can you hear me?" No response. She sighed, feeling foolish for hoping. Then, as she turned to adjust his IV, she saw it, the tiniest movement of his finger, almost nothing, a twitch that could be dismissed as an involuntary muscle spasm. Ellie's heart raced. She leaned closer. "Julian, if you can hear me, move your finger again." Nothing happened for so long that she began to doubt what she'd seen. Then slowly, deliberately, his index finger curled and uncurled. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're in there, you can hear me." The monitors showed no change in his brain activity or other vitals. According to every medical device in the room, Julian Blackwell was still in a deep coma. But Ellie had seen what she'd seen. "I should get the doctor," she said, starting to move away. Julian's finger moved again, more urgently this time. Ellie hesitated. "You don't want me to tell anyone?" Another deliberate movement. "Yes." Her nursing training screamed at her to report this immediately, but something else, intuition perhaps, made her pause. "Is it about your stepmother?" And Andrew? Another yes. I've heard them talking, Ellie admitted, keeping her voice low despite the empty room. They're pushing to take control of your company while you're like this. Yes. Ellie sat down beside the bed, her mind racing. How long have you been able to hear? To what's happening around you? Julian's finger tapped twice. 2 weeks? Yes. Ellie's throat tightened as the implication hit her. For 2 weeks he had been lying here, conscious but unable to move, listening as his family plotted against him, completely helpless. They said something about filing papers soon, she whispered. I think they're trying to declare you incompetent. They're rushing it. Julian's heart monitor beeped slightly faster, the only outward sign of his distress. I don't know what to do, Ellie confessed. If I tell the doctors you're responsive, Victoria will know. She practically owns this hospital wing. She thought for a moment, then reached for her personal phone. We need a system. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. I'll ask you questions when we're alone. We'll document everything. For the first time since the accident, Julian Blackwell's face showed the faintest hint of expression, a minute relaxation around his eyes that might have been relief. You're not alone anymore, Ellie promised, sudden fierce protectiveness surging through her. We'll figure this out together. As dawn broke over the city, Ellie slipped out of Julian's room with a secret that could destroy the Blackwell empire and possibly put her in danger. She had no idea how deep the conspiracy went or who she could trust. All she knew was that a man who the world believed was unconscious had placed his life in her hands, and she wouldn't let him down. By day, Ellie played her role perfectly, efficient, professional, giving no hint that she knew Julian could hear and understand everything around him. But at night, when the hospital corridors emptied and Victoria and Andrew had gone home to their mansions, she would sit beside Julian's bed with her notebook, establishing their secret communication. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no, she reminded him each time. We're going to get you through this. Over the course of a week, through patient questioning and Julian's careful responses, Ellie pieced together the truth. The accident that had put Julian in the hospital had been no accident at all. He remembered the car's brakes failing on the mountain road, remembered thinking it was strange because he'd just had the Bentley serviced the previous day. You think someone tampered with your car? Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 1 tap. Yes. And you think it was Victoria or Andrew? A pause, then 1 tap. Ellie wrote everything down in a small notebook she kept hidden in her apartment. We need proof, she said, and we need to know who we can trust. Through tapping out letters, a painstaking process that required immense concentration from Julian, he gave her a name, Michael Bennett, his personal attorney who had been mysteriously shut out of Blackwell business since the accident. I can contact him, Ellie said, but we need to be careful. If Victoria suspects anything, Julian's heart monitor beeped faster. I know, Ellie soothed, placing her hand over his. I won't let anything happen to you. She tried not to think about how her hand lingered on his, or how in the soft glow of the nighttime hospital lights, Julian Blackwell's face seemed both vulnerable and strong. She was his nurse. This was about saving his life, not developing feelings that could never lead anywhere. The next day, Ellie placed a call to Michael Bennett from a payphone during her lunch break. She expected to leave a message with the secretary, but to her surprise, he answered immediately. This is Bennett. Mr. Bennett, my name is Ellie Morgan. I'm a nurse at Mercy Hospital. I care for Julian Blackwell. There was a pause. How did you get this number, Ms. Morgan? Julian gave it to me. Another, longer pause. That's not possible. Julian is in a coma. That's what everyone believes, Ellie said carefully. But it's not the whole truth. I need to meet with you somewhere private. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop across town, far from the hospital and the Blackwell offices. Ellie felt like she was in a spy movie, constantly checking to make sure she wasn't being followed. Michael Bennett turned out to be a serious-looking man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Explain, he said once they were seated in a back corner. Ellie told him everything. Julian's secret consciousness, Victoria and Andrew's whispered conversations, the suspicious accident. Bennett listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer by the minute. I've suspected something wasn't right, he admitted when she finished. Victoria pushed through a change in Julian's power of attorney the day after the accident. I've been locked out of all proceedings since then. What do? We need evidence. Without it, it's just a nurse's word against one of the most powerful families in the city. As they talked, a plan began to take shape. Bennett would prepare legal documents ready to reinstate Julian's control over his company. Ellie would continue documenting everything she heard in Julian's room. And together they would find a way to prove the brakes had been tampered with. "Be careful," Bennett warned as they parted. "These people have hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. They won't hesitate to remove any obstacle, including you." Ellie returned to the hospital with renewed determination. That night, she told Julian about her meeting with Bennett. "We're going to get you out of this," she promised. "Just a little longer." But time was running out. The next afternoon, Ellie overheard Victoria on the phone in the hallway outside Julian's room. "The papers will be ready tomorrow," Victoria was saying. "Once we have control of the medical decisions, we can move him to a long-term care facility. Somewhere discreet." Ellie's blood ran cold. She slipped into Julian's room and whispered what she'd heard. "We need to move faster," she said urgently. "I think they're planning to take you somewhere we can't reach you." Julian's finger tapped rapidly, his only way of showing fear. "I won't let that happen," Ellie vowed. "I promise." That night, she stayed late, telling the night shift nurse she wanted to catch up on paperwork. Once alone with Julian, she pulled out her phone. "I'm going to record everything they say from now on," she told him. "It's risky, but we need proof." As if on cue, the door opened. Ellie barely had time to slide her phone under Julian's pillow before Victoria and Andrew walked in. "Working late, Nurse Morgan?" Victoria asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Just finishing up some notes, Mrs. Blackwell." "Dedicated," Andrew commented. "That's admirable." Something in his tone made Ellie's skin crawl. She gathered her papers. "I'll leave you to visit." "Actually," Victoria said, "we'd like to speak with you about Julian's care going forward." Ellie forced herself to look calm. "Of course. We've decided to transfer Julian to a specialized facility," Andrew explained. "One more suited to long-term care." "The doctor hasn't mentioned this," Ellie said carefully. "It's been decided," Victoria said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The arrangements have been made for tomorrow afternoon." Ellie glanced at Julian, seeing the panic in the slight tension around his mouth that no one else would notice. "I see. I'll make sure everything is prepared." "There's one more thing," Victoria added. "We've requested a different nurse to oversee the transfer. You've been working too hard, Ellie. Take tomorrow off." It wasn't a suggestion. It was removing her from Julian's side at the critical moment. "I understand," Ellie said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'll finish my notes and go." As soon as Victoria and Andrew left, she retrieved her phone. The recording had captured everything. She leaned close to Julian's ear. "I won't leave you," she whispered fiercely. "Whatever they're planning, we'll stop them. I'll be here tomorrow, I promise." She didn't know how she would manage it, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Somewhere in the past month, saving Julian Blackwell had become more than a moral obligation. It had become the most important thing in her world. Morning arrived with a sense of urgency that seemed to vibrate through the hospital walls. Ellie had barely slept, spending most of the night on the phone with Michael Bennett, finalizing their desperate plan. She wasn't scheduled to work. Victoria had made sure of that. But Ellie arrived at the hospital anyway, wearing street clothes and carrying a coffee like any visitor. Her heart pounded as she approached Julian's room. The hallway was empty. The transfer wasn't scheduled until afternoon. Slipping inside, she found Julian alone, his eyes closed but his finger tapping gently on the blanket as soon as he heard her footsteps. "It's me," she whispered, rushing to his side. "I don't have much time. Bennett is on his way with the documents and the police. We have the recording from last night and he's found evidence of tampering with your car's brake line. But we have to move quickly. They're coming for you at noon." Julian's finger tapped once. "Yes. Understanding." Ellie hesitated, then took his hand. "There's something else. Something I need to say before everything changes." She took a deep breath. "These past few weeks, getting to know you through our conversations, one-sided as I've never connected with anyone the way I've connected with you, and I know it's absurd. You're Julian Blackwell, and I'm just a nurse, and you might not even remember any of this when you fully recover, but I needed you to know." She felt a gentle pressure on her hand. Julian was squeezing her fingers, the first deliberate movement beyond the tapping of his index finger. When she looked at his face, she saw a single tear sliding down his cheek. The door opened behind her. Ellie turned, expecting security guards or Victoria's cold stare. Instead, Michael Bennett entered, accompanied by two serious-looking detectives. "Right on time," Bennett said. "How is he?" "The same," Ellie replied, quickly wiping away her own tears. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Bennett said. "Victoria and Andrew will be here soon. The detectives have some questions for them." They didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes later, Victoria swept into the room, stopping short when she saw the unexpected gathering. Andrew was a step behind her, his confident expression faltering. "What is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded. "Nurse Morgan, you are not scheduled today." "And who are these people?" "Michael Bennett," the attorney introduced himself. Julian's lawyer. "And these are Detectives Reed and Miller." "This is absurd," Victoria began. "I don't know what this nurse has told you, but—" "This nurse," Ellie interrupted, "has been documenting your conversations in this room for the past 2 weeks. She pulled out her phone and played the recording from the previous night." Victoria's voice filled the room. "Once we have control of the medical decisions, we can move him somewhere discreet." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You've been spying on us? That's illegal?" "Not as illegal as attempted murder," Detective Reed said. "We have evidence that the brake line in Mr. Blackwell's car was deliberately cut." Andrew took a step backward. "That's ridiculous. We had nothing to do with any accident." "Interesting you'd say that," Bennett remarked, "since no one mentioned anything about an accident being deliberate." Andrew's eyes darted to Victoria, who stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. "There's more," Ellie said. "Julian can hear everything. He's been conscious for weeks." "That's impossible," Victoria scoffed. "The doctors would know." "Julian," Ellie said, clearly, "can you hear me?" "Show them." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, deliberately, Julian's eyes opened. The room fell silent as he focused first on Ellie, then turned his gaze to Victoria and Andrew. That's not possible," Andrew stammered. The doctors said. "Hello, Victoria," Julian said, his voice hoarse from weeks of disuse. "Surprised to see me?" The shock on Victoria's face would have been comical under different circumstances. You can speak." "I can do more than that," Julian replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I can testify about everything I've heard in this room over the past month. About how you and Andrew planned to take my company. About how you discussed the unfortunate accident with my car." The detectives moved forward, reading Victoria and Andrew their rights as they placed them in handcuffs. Ellie watched in stunned silence as the two were led away, Victoria's composure finally cracking as she hurled accusations at everyone in sight. When they were gone, Ellie turned back to Julian, who was attempting to sit up. "Careful," she cautioned, adjusting the bed to help him. "You haven't used those muscles in a while." "You saved my life," he said simply, his eyes never leaving hers, not just from them, from the emptiness. "When all I could do was lie here and listen, your voice kept me going, your kindness, your courage." Ellie shook her head. "I just did what was right." "You did more than that." His hand found hers again. "You gave me something to fight for." 6 months later, Julian Blackwell stood at the podium in the newly renamed Ellie Morgan wing of Mercy Hospital, addressing the gathered crowd of reporters and medical staff. "Today marks the opening of the first facility in the country dedicated to patients with consciousness disorders," he announced. "People trapped in their own bodies, aware but unable to communicate. Thanks to our new technology and protocols, no one will have to endure what I experienced." He glanced to his side, where Ellie stood in a blue dress instead of scrubs, a small smile on her face. He reached for her hand. "None of this would exist without the courage of one nurse who chose to believe in me when everyone else had given up, who risked everything to save someone she barely knew." The cameras flashed as Julian turned to face Ellie directly. "I once thought my family's legacy was buildings and bank accounts, but you taught me that real legacy is in the lives we touch and the difference we make." Later that evening, as they walked hand in hand through the hospital garden, Ellie smiled at the man who had gone from being her patient to her partner. "Did you ever imagine when you were lying there unable to move that this is where we'd end up?" she asked. Julian stopped, turning to face her. "Actually, yes. It was what kept me fighting, the hope that someday I could tell you how I felt. How listening to you talk to me, care for me, fight for me, made me fall in love with you a little more each day." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As he knelt down on one knee, Ellie's hands flew to her mouth. "Ellie Morgan, will you marry me? Not because I owe you my life, but because you've given my life meaning." With tears streaming down her face, Ellie nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. As Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, he thought about how sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the greatest blessings. How a silent hospital room had led to the love of his life. How betrayal had led to purpose. And how one person's compassion had changed everything.